Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the life of Peter. We're going to pick up in John 13 today. I know we've skipped so much of the ministry of Jesus, and really to do the life of Peter justice, we would need to do an exhaustive study of the life of Jesus, or at least the public ministry of Jesus, so that we could say Peter was here. What did Peter see? What did Peter learn? Um, One thing that we do know about Peter is that he's a lifelong learner, and we haven't chosen to do that. We've tried to make this a little more manageable. We're going to be spending more than a month, closer to 6 weeks, on the life of Peter as it is. So I'm going to jump ahead to John 13 because I wanted to stick to moments that are particular to Peter and personal to Peter and personally involve Peter. John has given us a great gift in his gospel, writing at the end of the first century. He already had access to the other three gospels, and I think clearly to Paul's writings as well. And and so he fills in blanks for us. He gives us names that we don't get otherwise, and he tells us stories that we haven't gotten. And if all we had was 1 Corinthians 11 and Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we were talking about the Last Supper, and that's all we had, the question that you and I would be asking each other is, man, I wonder what Jesus said to them that night. I mean, I wonder what they talked about on that Last Supper. What words did he leave them with? Well, John gives them to us. John chapters 13 through 17, 4 chapters of primarily red ink, because he remembers every word of it, because it has shaped his life. And he wants us to know what Jesus said that night. And in John 13, the first thing that John tells us about the the Passover meal that would become our communion service is that it was interrupted in the middle because no one had had their feet washed, and everyone had stinky feet in their face. We know from Matthew, Mark, and Luke that Jesus began the dinner by taking the bread, ended it by taking the cup. And John tells us that in the middle, Jesus had to get up and wash the disciples' feet. And Peter's response to this is quite telling about him personally. Now, before the feast of Passover, in verse 1, chapter 13, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come and that he should depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were with him in the world, he loved them to the very end. And during supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had gone forth from God and was going back to God, rises from supper, lays aside his garments, taking a towel, girded himself about, poured water in a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter, and Simon said to him, Lord, you wash my feet? And Jesus said, what I do you do not realize now, but you'll understand it later. Peter said to him, you will never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, that's plural you, but not all of you. For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, not all of you are clean. And when he had washed their feet and had taken his garments and reclined again at the table, he said, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If then the Lord and teacher washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should do as I did to you. Now it's that simple. It's a simple act of service, and this is the most holy moment in their year, the observance of the Passover meal. They are reclining at table. I mean, it says so right there in the text. They're not sitting in chairs. They would have reclined diagonally so that they each was leaning on their elbow and had an arm free to eat from the table, but they're reclining on the floor. And so each man would have in close proximity to him someone else's feet. And no one had bothered to do the most basic act of hospitality, which was to wash their feet. And they certainly didn't wash their own feet. And so there they are in this moment, profaning it with their dirty feet. And Jesus interrupts the moment in the middle to quite deliberately. He makes um, a thing out of it, a deal out of it, because it is a deal. And he takes off his robe and he girds himself with a towel and he pours water in a basin, and they're all reclining there, and so they're in a vulnerable position as they recline at table, and he's behind them while he's doing it. They're having to look back over their shoulder to see him do what he's doing. Let's visualize this. And he starts to take their feet and to wet their feet and to dry their feet. um, You just have to turn back a few pages to see what Mary did with his feet and with the nard. And now he's washing their feet. And they didn't know how to process that either. They objected to that. And it had to be so completely overwhelming to them, embarrassing to them. Oh, just to be there's a there's a phrase in Song of Solomon, of all places, chapter 6. I think it's verse 2 or 3. It's where the male, the man, the beloved, the husband, says to the wife, "Turn your gaze away from me because you overwhelm me." And I can't, don't look at me because the way you feel about me is overwhelming to me. And I'm sure they had a similar, what do you do with this? I mean, you know who he is. You don't know what he's about to do, but you know who he is. That's why you're there. And he's washing your feet. And it had to be awful. It had to be absolutely awful for them. Um, And Peter can't take it. And Peter says that you will never wash my feet. No, I'm not letting you do this. This is not right. And in the mathematics of his calculation of good and bad and who he is, let's not forget, get away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. That's the same person who's saying to him, you are never going to wash my feet. And Jesus says, I have to wash your feet or you don't have any part of me. And so then Peter tries to make it something that it is not, some ritual thing, not a simple act of service, which is ritual enough in itself, of course. And he says, oh, then my face and my head and my hands. And Jesus says, no, it is what it is. This is a simple act of service. You're not going to make it anything else. And then he explains to all the rest of them that it is a simple act of service. He could not speak more plainly. You call me Master and Lord, and that's correct because that's who I am. And I washed your feet, and that's right too, because a servant is not greater than his Lord, and you should wash each other's feet. I came not to be served, but to serve and to give my life a ransom for many, which I'm going to do tomorrow. And you won't even show the common courtesy to take care of each other at this most important moment. It was awful for them, and it was intended to be awful for them. And the person who reacted to it was Peter. And I think the reason he reacted when everyone else held their tongue is because he's the one who felt the least worthy. He's the one who, when Jesus called him, said, no, I'm sinful. You, you need to not be around me. And I think that's where this is coming from. Okay. Jesus, on this very night, is going to warn Peter that he will betray him that night. And I want us to talk about that next time. Thank you for joining me for what is now nearly 10 good minutes with the Word.